Silas Vane didn't care much for the sound of company. Out here, in the jagged teeth of the Montana high country, company usually meant trouble, and Silas had spent 20 years trying to bury his share of it. He lived in a house built of cedar and silence, tucked so far into the timber that even the tax man forgot he existed. The wind was different that morning. It carried the scent of wet iron and exhausted horses. Silas stood on his porch, a mug of coffee in his hand. Black as coal and twice as bitter. He watched the ridgeline. 3 riders, moving slow, too slow for honest men, and too deliberate for travelers. He didn't reach for his Winchester. Not yet. He just leaned against the porch post and felt the ache in his shoulder, the one he'd carried since the siege of Vicksburg. A reminder that no matter how far you run, the lead you take in your youth stays in your bones until the dirt claims you. The horses broke through the tree line. 2 men in duster coats, faces hidden behind grit and wide-brimmed hats. They were leading a 3rd horse, a small bay mare, and on that mare sat a shape that made Silas's heart do a slow, painful roll in his chest. She was wrapped in a heavy, grease-stained poncho. Her wrists were tied to the pommel. Her head was bowed, hair matted with the red dust of the lower plains. She looked like a ghost even before she reached the gate. "Rancher," the lead rider called out. His voice was like gravel in a tin bucket. "We need a place to water, and maybe a sturdy branch. The law doesn't reach this far, but justice does." Silas didn't move. He didn't blink. He just watched the girl on the horse. She was trembling, not from the cold. The sun was high and mean, but from the kind of fear that rots a person from the inside out. "This is private land," Silas said, his voice a low rumble. "And I don't care about the hangings on it. The soil already had enough blood." The lead rider pulled his horse to a stop. He was a big man, built like a bull, with a silver star pinned to a vest that hadn't been cleaned in a year. A deputy of his own making, Silas reckoned. "She's a thief, old man," the big one said, spitting a glob of tobacco into the dirt. "Stole from the wrong payroll. We're taking her back to Red Creek, but I'm thinking she won't make the trip. Too much dead weight. We'll pay you for the use of your tree. 5 gold eagles." Silas looked at the girl. For the first time, she lifted her head. Her face was a map of misery. A purple bruise bloomed across her left cheek. Her lips were split, but it was her eyes, wide, terrified, and a startling, piercing blue that stopped the air in Silas's lungs. He'd seen those eyes before, 20 years ago, in a farmhouse in Tennessee that had been burning to the ground. "Her name," Silas whispered. "What's her name?" The 2nd rider laughed. A high, wheezing sound. "Does it matter? She's Sarah Lou now. That's what's on the poster." The girl's voice broke the air then. It wasn't a scream. It was a jagged, desperate rasp. "Stop. That's not my name." She looked straight at Silas. The riders jerked the rope, tightening it around her wrists, making her wince. But she didn't look away from the rancher. "Tell them," she choked out. "Tell them who I am, Silas." The riders froze. The lead man looked from the girl to Silas, his hand drifting toward the peacemaker on his hip. "How'll she know your name, rancher?" Silas set his coffee mug down on the porch rail. Slow, careful. His hands weren't shaking, but his soul was. He felt like he'd just stepped through a doorway back into 1864. "She's right," Silas said, and for the first time in 2 decades, he felt the old coldness, the soldier's coldness, settle over him. "That ain't her name, and she ain't going to Red Creek." The riders didn't like that answer. They shifted in their saddles, their horses sensing the sudden spike in the air. "You got a lot of nerve for a man standing alone on a porch," the big deputy said. "We got the paper. We got the guns. Step aside, Silas Vane, where you can find a branch right next to her." Silas didn't step aside. Instead, he stepped down, one wooden stair at a time. His boots crunched on the dry earth. He walked right up to the bay mare. The riders watched him like hawks, their fingers twitching near their holsters. Silas ignored them. He reached up and took the girl's chin in his hand. He looked past the dirt, past the pain, searching for a memory he'd tried to kill with 1,000 bottles of rye. "Little bird," he whispered. The girl's eyes filled with tears, carving white tracks through the dust on her face. She nodded once. It was her, Elara, the daughter of the woman he'd loved and lost during the war. He'd thought she was dead. He'd told himself she was dead, so he could sleep at night. I thought you were on the ground, Elara, Silas said, his voice breaking. Hank! He took me, she whispered. He told me you died. He told me I was alone. The big rider kicked his horse forward, forcing Silas back. I don't care about your family reunions. This girl is property of the territory now. Get your hands off her. Now, if you're sitting there wondering how a man like Silas, a man who lived for 20 years in the shadows, could find the strength to stand up to 3 armed men for a ghost, well, maybe you've had a ghost of your own. Life has a way of testing the fences we build around our hearts. Sometimes it takes a single word, a name you thought you'd never hear again, to make a man remember who he was before the world broke him. If this story is hitting you in that place where the old memories live, do me a favor. Take a second to hit that like button. It helps us keep these tales of the old West alive. For the folks who know that out here, the truth is usually buried under a layer of dust and blood. And if you want to know if Silas can save the only thing he has left, make sure you're subscribed. Now, back to the ranch. Silas didn't have his rifle. He didn't have his pistol. All he had was a skinning knife tucked into his belt and a rage that had been simmering for 2 decades. The lead rider pulled his gun. The hammer clicked back, a sound that, in the silence of the mountains, sounded like a mountain cracking in half. Step back, Silas. Last warning. Silas didn't step back. He looked at the rider's eyes. He saw the greed there, the cowardice. These weren't lawmen. They were vultures in human skin. You're going to leave the girl, Silas said. You're going to turn those horses around. And you're going to ride until the sun goes down. If I see your dust on my land again, I won't be talking. The rider sneered. You in what army, old man? Silas smiled then. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of a man who had seen the trenches of Virginia. I don't need an army. I just need to remember why I'm still breathing. Suddenly, Silas moved. He wasn't fast like a young man, but he was precise. He grabbed the bay mare's bridle and jerked it hard. The horse reared, its hooves flashing in the air. The sudden movement spooked the rider's horses. In the chaos, Silas reached up and sliced through the rope, holding Elara's wrists. Run to the house, he roared. Elara didn't hesitate. She rolled off the horse, hitting the dirt hard, and scrambled toward the porch. The rider started shooting. The first bullet took Silas in the meat of his thigh. He didn't fall. He just grunted, the pain turning into fuel. He lunged to the second rider, the one with the wheezing laugh, and pulled him clean out of the saddle. They hit the ground in a tangle of dust and leather. Silas didn't use his knife. He used his hands. He used his elbows. He fought like a man who had nothing left to lose, because for 20 years, he'd had nothing. Now he had everything. The lead rider was trying to steady his horse to get a clear shot at the girl on the porch. Elara had found Silas's Winchester in the rack by the door. Her hand was shaking, but she knew how to lever around. Crack! The shot went wide, splintering the fence post, but it was enough to make the big rider flinch. Silas was on top of the wheezing man now. He took a heavy blow to the jaw. The world spinning for a second, he tasted salt and copper. But then he saw Elara on that porch, looking at him with the same blue eyes her mother had. You're dead, Vane, the big man screamed. Silas scrambled behind the watering trough. His leg was screaming. Blood was soaking through his trousers, hot and sticky. He reached into the dirt and found a heavy stone. He didn't need to kill the man. He just needed to get to his own gun. He threw the stone. It didn't hit the rider, but it hit the horse's flank. The animal bolted. Silas used a second of distraction to sprint for the porch. Every step was like a knife in his leg. He collapsed onto the wooden boards, his hand reaching out. Elara, the rifle. She slid the Winchester across the wood. Silas caught her by the barrel, rolled onto his back, and levered the action in one fluid, instinctive motion. He found his knife. One quick motion. The wheezing man went still. Silas rolled away just as the lead rider fired again. The bullet kicked up dirt an inch from his head. The lead rider had managed to turn his horse. He was aiming his pistol. Silas didn't think. He didn't breathe. He just felt the weight of the rifle, the familiar, cold comfort of it. Boom. The big man fell backward off his horse like a sack of grain. Silence followed the shot. The third rider, the one who had stayed in the back, didn't wait to see what happened next. He spurred his horse and vanished into the timber, leaving his partners in the dirt. The dust settled. The mountain seemed to draw a long, shaky breath. Silas lay on the porch, his chest heaving. He looked up at the sky. It was so blue it hurt. Then, a shadow fell over him. Elara, she knelt beside him, her small hands pressing down on the wound in his leg. She was crying now. Quiet, jagged sobs that tore at Silas's heart more than the bullet had. "You stayed," she whispered. "You really stayed." "I told your mother I'd never leave you," Silas rasped, his eyes fluttering. I got lost for a while. Elara, I got lost in the dark." She leaned her head against his chest. "I found you. I followed the stories. They said there was a man in the mountains who looked like he'd seen the end of the world. I knew it was you." Silas reached up and stroked her matted hair. He looked at the men in the dirt. They were just more ghosts now. But the girl was real. She was warm. She was alive. Later that night, the cabin smelled of sage and liniment. Silas sat by the fire, his leg bandaged, a fresh cup of coffee in his hand. Elara had cleaned the dust from her face. She sat across from him, wrapped in one of his old wool blankets. They didn't talk about the riders. They didn't talk about the gold or the payroll. They talked about Tennessee. They talked about her mother's garden. They talked about the 20 years that had been stolen from them. "What now, Silas?" she asked. Silas looked at the fire. He looked at the door he'd kept locked for so long. "Now," he said, "we stop running. This ranch, it needs a lot of work. The fences are down. The garden's gone to weeds. And I reckon I'm too old to do alone." Elara smiled. It was a small thing, but it lit up the room. "I'm a good worker. Silas, Hank made sure of that." Silas gripped his mug. "Hank won't ever touch you again. Not as long as there's lead in my belt and air in my lungs. The West is a hard place. Folks, it's a place where names can be stolen, and lives can be erased by a single stroke of pen or a single pull of the trigger. But it's also a place where the truth has a funny way of rising to the surface. Like a spring in the desert. Silas Vane thought he was a dead man walking. He thought his story had ended in the smoke of the Civil War. But life gave him one more chapter. One more chance to be the man he promised he'd be. It wasn't about the fight. It wasn't about guns. It was about dropping the rope, dropping the guilt and the shame, and looking the past in the eye without blinking. How many of us are carrying ropes we need to drop? How many of us are living under a name that isn't ours? Just survive the day. Maybe it's time to stand on the porch and wait for the riders. Maybe it's time to remember who you were before the world told you who you had to be. If Silas and Elara's story moved you today, leave a comment below. Tell me where you're listening from and what ghost you're still carrying. We read every single one, and we appreciate you being part of this journey into heart of the Old West. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next chapter. Out here, the wind never stops blowing, and the stories never truly end. They just wait for someone brave enough to tell them. Take care of yourselves, and keep your eyes on the ridgeline. Until next time,